to attend FFD4, or if you'll be following the process virtually. And the process of following virtually is also important because then we will support the rest of the crew that will be traveling and will be there physically. We know how stressful, how challenging engaging in some of these global spaces can be. And so when you have support from people who are not on the ground, there's a way in which it does energize you. So we are very happy to have you here, and we have created this space as a space for us to be able to deep dive into the nitty-gritties of some of the specific themes that are being discussed within the context of the FFD. We have already been part of a number of spaces that have focused on strategizing and getting clarity in terms of what our Pan-African but also feminist position should be when it comes to some of the issues. And if you've been following this process very closely, you realize that there's been a number of positions that have been developed to inform different series of documents that have come through from the UN. And so part of what we would want to do in this particular space is to get into some of the technicalities, the technical issues around the different issues that have been discussed. And this is really part of the process of preparing for the Financing for Development conference that will happen in Seville in Spain from 30th June to 3rd July. And so this particular process, or the webinars, the Zoom meetings that we have organized have been divided into two specific sessions. So we'll have the first session today and have the second session on Thursday. So today we will focus specifically on tax and trade, and acknowledging that there are so many linkages between the two topics. And so we would like to understand some of the issues around it. So politically understand some of the issues around these two areas. And then on Thursday, we will focus a bit more on the topics of debt, as well as ecological justice and climate finance. And so as we embark on this particular journey of understanding these different topics, today the first session will be facilitated or led by Jen Nalunga, who is the Executive Director of Siatini. Siatini is Southern and Eastern Africa Trade Information and Negotiations Institute. And Siatini has been keen right from its inception, following trade-related issues and linking trade to different aspects of development. And so Jen comes to us with an expansive understanding of the trade issue, right from the local to national to regional and global level. And so today, as she unpacked trade within the context of FFD, we will be able to get very interesting insights on this particular topic. The other person, and I'd like to describe the two of them as seasoned friends of AMWA, because we have partnered with their organizations, but also with them individually in different ways. So the other person that will be sharing with us different insights today will be Everlyn Muendo, who is the Tax and International Financial Architecture Policy Analyst and Policy Officer at the Tax Justice Network Africa. And Everlyn, initially when I met Everlyn, she was focused on tax and investment related issues, the intersections between the two, and now is currently specifically focusing on tax within the context of the international financial architecture, and she has closely been following the UN tax convention process, for example, as well as tax within the context of FFD. So the two of them are expert minds that will be sharing invaluable insights and helping us really understand the current FFD outcome, the current process generally, how the process and the outcomes of this process will impact African countries and communities, but also getting us to understand what priorities should be at the forefront of our advocacy when we get to Seville or virtually, depending on how you plan to engage. And so without taking much time, I'd like to invite Jen, who will start us off by unpacking trade within the context of the FFD process. Jen, over to you.
Okay. Let me see. Okay. Good afternoon, comrades, ladies and gentlemen. You will pardon me because I'm going to switch off my video. Where I am, I'm deep in the village.
I think we can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Hello?
Actually, I can hear you properly, Jen. Faith, you may have an issue with connection.
Sure if you have your mic.
Can you hear me, Faith?
Oh, you could hear Jen.
Okay, yes, I could hear.
Sorry about that. I think it's
okay.
It's on my end. Apologies for that.
Okay. No,
Yes.
it's all right. But I'm going to switch off my video because I'm up country and my network is not very good. So if you can't hear me, you let me know. So I would like first of all to thank you, Faith and Akina, and also TGNA and other organizations which have put up this conversation. And it's really a critical conversation coming at a very critical time when we are going to Sevilla, in Spain. When we are going to Spain, we need to know. We need to know what's happening. And for some of us who have been in a number of negotiations, if you don't know what's happening, really you can get lost. And sometimes you can think that you are making headways when you are not getting anything. So I will try to, from the trade perspective, I will try to share what I see as what's happening and what we need to do when we are in Spain, in Sevilla. What I want also to, before I go into the trade arena, I want us to be clear about the FFD process, this financing for development process. That is a very, very important process for us as developing countries. And developing, I'm looking at developing and LDCs, least developing countries. Because one, the FFD process is bringing on board the nexus between finance and development, and that's really an urgent need today. How do we, as developing countries, as LDCs, finance our development to achieve the SDGs? Because, as you know, a number of studies are showing that it will be impossible for us to achieve the SDGs. So there is a challenge of financing our development. Another issue is the fact that the FFD process is also looking at reforming the international financial architecture, not just financial, but also the trade. So it's about reforming the entire economic governance, global economic governance. And I will come to that because the global economic architecture is not working for us as developing countries, as least developing countries. And lastly, this FFD conference is coming at a time when we have a number of the polycrises. They are complex crises. They are interconnected, each one feeding on the other. For example, the COVID. The COVID crisis is still with us. We are looking at issues of debt, and it's good, Faith, you are going to discuss the debt issue in the FFD. We are looking at countries which are spending more on servicing their debt than they are spending on social services and education and all that. We are looking at issues of the geopolitical tensions, so this FFD is coming at the right time. That's what I wanted to say before we go into the actual trade issue. But again, what I want to point out is that there have been interventions in place. There are challenges, there are interventions. When you look at trade, there have been issues in the WTO. There are negotiations, bilateral negotiations, but all these interventions can't work because of the economic architecture, so they make all these interventions fall short of what's required. Another issue which I want to point out is that the FFD, Sevilla is a culmination of a long set of negotiations, the PrepCom. The UN General Assembly established an intergovernmental preparatory committee. That's why they call them PrepComs, to prepare for the FFD. So those of you who have been participating, you were in Ethiopia, in Addis Ababa, that was PrepCom, I think 3, then New York. So these PrepComs have been negotiating sites, So I have seen these negotiations, successive negotiations, watering down what the ambition we started with. In fact, when you look at the first document, the zero draft, very ambitious, with a lot of hope. But where we are now, it's a problem. So we have seen countries negotiating, especially developed countries, supporting their positions. So for me, I think that has watered down these negotiations. When you look at the ambition which we started with, there has been, for me, it has been really disappointing. There are issues in trade, because trade is critical when it comes to financing our SDGs. And for us who are in the trade movement, we call it the positive agenda, because when others you are fighting, we don't want this way. But for trade, that's the positive, where we can be able to generate our own resources. So when you look at trade, when we started in the zero draft, there are issues which we had put there and which are not negotiable for developing countries and for LDCs. For example, issues around unilateral trade measures. All of you have heard about the tariffs, people putting, countries putting tariffs on, imposing tariffs on our products. this is very, very bad for our development, for our trade. For example, when you see Lesotho, when the US imposed tariffs on their textiles, that's wiping out almost the total income of the people of the countries. In fact, in Lesotho, most of the women, it's women who work in those textile industries. So that's what was one of the issues we are saying, unilateral measures shouldn't be put in place. And our position on unilateral measures was that they have to be negotiated, but when you look at the outcome as it is now, it has been watered down. Maybe this is what I want to say again broadly, that there is language negotiations that we call best endeavor. It's not binding. You can't enforce it. And when you look at the text the way it is now, you see words like we encourage, we are calling upon, we make sure, we ensure. That's the best endeavor language. And you see it littered all over, So some people, if you don't know about that language, you can say, oh, they have talked about unilateral measures. But when you look at exactly what they are saying about it, they are talking about encouraging. So you can't enforce encouragement. When you encourage me, I can be encouraged, okay? But you can't force me to be encouraged, So that's what we call the best endeavor language. And so when you are reading this text, because we are not going to look at each and every article, but when you are reading, especially in your area of interest, look at the language. Is it enforceable or best endeavor? If it's best endeavor, then you know that's you are in trouble. Another area for us, which was also very critical, was the issue on the unilateral environment measures. The unilateral environment measures, for example, countries which are producing coffee. The European Union has told us that we need to map out, we need to show them that we never cut down forests and, and all that. It's called the European deforestation regulation, So they are telling us, for example, that come end of this year, if we haven't mapped out all our farmers, we shouldn't take our coffee to Europe. For us, this was very, very unfair. Because in the first place, we are not the polluters. We never polluted. In the second place, such a measure is going to disrupt most of our economies. For example, Uganda, coffee is the second export earner, income earner, because it's our second biggest export. So we are looking at a strong language there, we don't see it. Another issue, I don't know how many minutes I have, another issue, which was also non-negotiable, was the reform of the investors.
Sorry, Jane, I think we lost you.
Jen, can you hear us? I think we lost her, but we'll just give her a few minutes to to return. Okay, she has dropped off. No? She's still on. Jen, you're muted. Okay. Now you're back, I think. Jen, can you hear us? Hello? Okay, I think Jen was. I think she has now completely dropped off, so we'll give her a few more minutes.
Hello?
Okay, now we can
Hello?
hear you. Yes.
I'm so sorry. You know, one of the issues for discussion at Sevilla is the issue of the digital economy, how we can be able to address the digital gap, the digital divide between developing and developing countries. And what we are looking at there is the policy space for us to be able to protect our future national space for this digital development, but also digital industrial policies. And again, there, the language which is in there is not very encouraging, because again we are looking at on the digital economy to be able to retain control and ownership of our national data, to be able to retain the right to regulate activities of global digital corporations. But also, it goes also including the right to tax them. So I'm bringing out the whole issue of the digital divide, but also there is an internal divide, because I'm up country. If I was in the capital, things would have been okay. So there are all those digital divides within and between countries. Before I went off, we are looking at another issue which is non-negotiable, which we had put there right at the beginning, the issue of investor-state dispute settlement mechanism. This is a mechanism whereby our investors can take our governments to court. But the courts are also problematic. They are tribunals, and they are in London, outside there. We spend a lot of money. But the most important thing, because our governments fear those tribunals, they end up not putting appropriate policies in place, especially climate policies. In fact, for people who are here on this platform working on climate change, one of the problems is going to be this investor-state dispute mechanism. We call it policy chill. They put a chill on our policies. So we're saying that these mechanisms should be totally outlawed. We want it terminated, and we want that we put a standstill on all pending ISDS cases until the reform process is completed, But another issue on investment is also to regulate those, to review and regulate all those investments, because the investment policies in place and the agreements give all the rights to the investors without any obligations at all. When you look at most of the investment policies we have, the agreements we have.
Sorry, Jen, we lost you again. But we also acknowledge that you mentioned that you're in the countryside. So I guess this is just a test of what the digital divide looks like.
Hello?
Yes, we can now hear you.
Okay, I was looking at
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Okay, when you look at the document on table today, it says that we resolved to support efforts to reform ISDS. We encourage, the one we resolve to support, they are supporting efforts. They are supporting efforts. Another one, they say we encourage updating and reforming outdated investment agreements. We encourage, like I said, that's best endeavor language. And the issue of investment is very, very critical, especially when it comes to feminists. That's one area which you need really to look at, because it's
Unfortunately, the internet is not.
You have lost
now
me.
We can hear you. We had lost you again, but now we can hear you.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Another area which was really important is the issue of policy space for development. Many developing countries lack or need the policy space to be able to put in place policies that align to their national development priorities. That issue is also very, very critical. But when you look at, they didn't talk, because we had requested that the issue of policy space should take into account the issue of reshaping the trade rules, especially the rules within the WTO. But what the text is saying, they say we will work to ensure the multilateral system continues to provide policy space. We work to ensure, so the language is really, really very, very weak. Another issue, which was also very important to us, was the issue of special and differential treatment. Because, special and differential treatment is very, very important for developing and poor countries, because special and differential treatment provides for flexibility to enable, the poor countries and weak countries to participate more effectively in the global trade. For example, issues around preferential market access, technical assistance. These measures help countries to address their unique development challenges. Again, maybe it was a bit okay, because they borrowed the language of the Africa group to make this treatment precise, effective, and operational. Then maybe lastly, second last, we also raised the issue of agricultural trade reforms, because agriculture, as you know, is really critical for us developing countries. And also there have been stalled negotiations in the WTO. So we are looking at the UN being able to push the WTO to address those issues. Issues, for example, that subsidies, developing countries are giving lots of subsidies, which are affecting our agriculture. Issues around public stock holding, where governments can be able to buy from farmers, providing a market for farmers, but also ensuring that when there is any food security challenge, our government can be able to respond. That's an issue which is also on table in the WTO. Issues around a special safeguard mechanism where countries can be able to protect their agriculture from the import surges. That's also an issue on the table, and other issues. So we thought the UN would come out strongly on this issue. But the text on the table says members to actively engage in the ongoing WTO negotiations on agriculture. That's what they are saying. They are encouraging members to actively engage in the ongoing negotiations. Lastly, the issue of critical minerals. I don't know how many minutes I have, Faith.
So yeah, lastly would be perfect because you had about 5 more minutes.
Okay.
You have about 5 more minutes.
Okay. Now, the issue of critical minerals is also there on that table, because critical minerals are very, very important for energy transition, but also for critical minerals, it's also our chance maybe to be able to industrialize. In Africa, as you know, we already have the Africa Mining Vision, which is a vision to help with the beneficiation of our minerals. So we are really banking on those critical minerals to be able to kickstart or to fuel our structural transformation. And the issues which we had put on the table is to ensure that the critical minerals meet our national sustainable development objectives, but also to ensure due diligence for transnational corporations, to ensure that there is accountability and they are regulated, and also beneficial, equitable benefit sharing, and also protection of the environment and community rights. But again, when you look at the issues which are in the text, they don't really address most of those issues. So what I'm saying, it's so difficult to go on, looking at each issue. But for me, in conclusion, really what I'm saying, that the language in this, the text is very weak. The issues are there. So don't fall for the issues. Look at the language. Can it be enforced or not? I will stop there, Faith. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen. Maybe before you completely leave that stage, I wanted you to also speak to the IP, the intellectual property rights and access to medicines issue. I don't know if it's an issue that has been explicitly addressed, but I think it was, I noticed that it was one of the things that were advanced by civil society through the mechanism.
Yeah, it was an issue which was addressed, but it's not in trade, by the way. Although we made some proposals, but we'll have to look at the what section is that. I will look at that section and be able to bring it in the trade section. What the text is saying on IP and access to technology, access to medicines and vaccines.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jen, for for unpacking that. I think for me, I specifically appreciate the emphasis you have placed on language, because language is a very critical tool. It's a political tool that the oppressor uses, and that we must be conscious about when we are pushing back, when we are challenging some of the things that we ought to challenge. And so we know that in many cases they have also captured our language, so they'll throw it in, but also ensure that it's not enforceable, and basically ensure that it is best endeavor, and that at the end of it all, yes, we've gotten a document that highlights certain issues that we have brought forward, but it's not implementable to guarantee that it delivers on our interests. So thank you so much. I hope that we have taken note of some of the comments or questions that we'd like to raise. I would now like to invite Everlyn, who will come in to unpack for us the issue of tax within the context of FFT. And then at the end of it all, we will have a plenary conversation where both Jen and Everlyn will respond to the questions. And would like to do it this way because Jen does also follow the tax component, but also Everlyn in many ways. For example, when we talk about issues around investment and the international investment system, is also able to highlight some of the things. So given their expansive expertise, I think it might be better for them to address the issues that will be raised on both aspects, but also acknowledging the intersection between the two will help us understand how the politics within trade in many ways is informing the politics around tax, and the other way around. So I would like to now hand over to you, Everlyn, to take us through the next issue. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I really hope you can see me clearly. Thank you, Faith, for that introduction, and thank you for organizing this event as Akina Mama wa Afrika. I think it's very timely considering that the conference is going to be happening in the next 2 weeks. So I think Jane really put it well when she said that unfortunately, as we move towards the conference, the ambition within the draft outcome document has really reduced, and there is a lot of language on we encourage, we endeavor, and very few actual tangible commitments. Overall, we know that the FFD process is a non-binding mechanism, but still it really does help to shape the work that we do with regard to financing for development across all the areas of importance with regard to the economy, such as tax, trade, debt, amongst other issues. And in fact, it was the last Financing for Development conference that happened in 2015 that really we were able to leverage on it to really drive on the process of starting an intergovernmental process on international tax and essentially setting up a UN tax convention. So the domestic public resources section, the section that deals with tax, is divided into 3. There's one part that talks about national fiscal systems, national tax systems. The other part talks about international tax cooperation. And then the last part talks about illicit financial flows. There's also a section on development banks, but then allow me to focus on the first 2 primarily. So on the national systems, first of all, it's a bit interesting for us that considering this is an international process, we will need to focus on national tax issues rather than focusing on what we can do to change the international tax system. But nevertheless, some of the interesting things that we saw was with regard to mainstreaming the environment, climate, and biodiversity within national tax systems. And the interesting thing is the methods which they spoke of. So they talked about introducing environmental taxes, which we find very curious, as well as also green budgeting and bonds. And so it's very interesting, considering that for a lot of our countries, the effectiveness of these measures has not really been observed. And also, the thing that we kept emphasizing is tax should not be a source of climate finance. And if we do put any mention of tax as a source of climate finance, then it should very clearly be sort of reinforced by the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. Within the International Tax Cooperation section, they had also talked about global solidarity levies in the earlier versions, but it's interesting to see that this section has been completely deleted. The document now focuses on national tax systems and how they can mainstream environment and climate rather than coming up with a global way of doing so. So that's very interesting. The other very interesting thing is with regard to tax transparency. So the first drafts had been very ambitious. I think Jane mentioned the principle of special and differential treatment. And so we were looking forward to finally having special and differential treatment in relation to some tax measures, such as exchange of information, because the exchange of information standards have been very difficult for African countries to attain. And also country by country reporting, public country by country reporting, as well as public beneficial ownership registries. So unfortunately, the attempts to essentially introduce special and differential treatment to tax transparency have been completely eroded. Instead, the wording that we have is we will provide capacity support to developing countries in order to help them reach these standards, rather than revisiting the standards and seeing how we can simplify it or publicizing this information so that it's accessible to tax administrations and so that we can be able to effectively tax multinational enterprises. The interesting thing though, like the compromise that we've gotten, is that at the very least, they will consider or evaluate the benefits of having a central country by country reporting system. They didn't say it will be public. They just talked about centralizing the system. And then they talked about setting up public domestic beneficial registries, and then considering the benefits of setting up a global public, a global, not public, but a global beneficial ownership registry. So all the public parts that we wanted have really been cut away to a certain extent within the latest version of the outcome document. The other interesting thing is we did see reference to gender responsive budgeting as well as gender responsive tax systems. And I think one of the benefits is for the first time we're talking about actually evaluating tax systems from a gender perspective, because one of the hardest things has been the lack of gender disaggregated tax data in a lot of our countries. So perhaps that's one of the only silver linings of the document. Of course, under international tax cooperation, it was also quite interesting, considering that we have another process going on, which is the UN Tax Convention, to see the discomfort of particularly global North countries in simply supporting an ongoing process that's already taking place at the UN. So, for instance, the language on supporting the UN Tax Convention process has really been weakened. We talk about essentially we will continue constructively engaging in this process, and we continue to call for the support of countries. We aren't using words like we commit to constructively engaging in this process. And the fact that this is actually a binding process, it was interesting to see the blockers of this process. In fact, at a certain point, they were trying to dilute some of the work that's already been done on the UN Tax Convention, for instance, by saying that we will engage with the UN Tax Convention process, but it has to be on the basis of consensus. And that's been one of the big fights that we've had with the UN Tax Convention process, because global North countries are insisting on consensus, which is not democratic, rather than making decisions based on majority or simple majority, because they know for the UN, the numbers of developing countries will be to the advantage of developing countries rather than the global North countries. So that has been very interesting. The other interesting thing that we've observed is that there is specific mention of still implementing OECD measures. So at first, the language said that we continue to call for the implementation of Pillar 1 of the two-pillar solution from the OECD, which was about the digital economy and all of that. But we all know that the US has sort of stopped this process because they pulled out, and without the consent of the US, because this is how the OECD designed it, the Pillar 1 cannot go on, at least Pillar 1 Amount A. It can't work without the US. They gave the US too much voting power. And so at first they wanted us to implement both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, when we all know Pillar 1 has sort of stagnated completely. And now the language is just on Pillar 2, of course, and essentially implementing the global minimum tax, despite the issues that developing countries had with the manner in which the global minimum tax has been structured. One of the advantages of the latest version is that it does talk about giving, I don't know what's happened with my screen. Oh, it's just my Teams. Sorry. One of the things that it talks about is essentially also taxing where value is created, which is a very important principle. It also ties into the work that we're doing under the UN Tax Convention. The other very interesting thing that was in the earlier versions that is no longer here is fossil fuel subsidies. So at first, the fight had been about essentially coming up with a commitment to address fossil fuel subsidies, but it wasn't general. Some countries wanted us to put the word harmful fossil fuel subsidies so that we can have that distinction between harmful and non-harmful fossil fuel subsidies. But now that paragraph has been completely deleted. And the interesting thing is that some of these deletions could quite possibly have come from some G77 countries. I think you know who I'm talking about, because at a certain point there was also resistance on the language on both climate as well as gender. But here we are, we managed to maintain some language on climate as well as gender, but fossil fuel subsidies unfortunately lost the fight. So it's interesting to see these new additions into the tax part of the outcome document in comparison to what was in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which was the previous outcome document of the last conference. Another observation, of course, is that there is talk about taxation of the natural resources, which I think is very important, especially as we move towards a just and equitable transition, making sure that we maintain a certain ownership of these natural resources, even in terms of our fiscal management. So this is important. All in all, I think at the end of the day, unfortunately, the FFD is a non-binding mechanism. And for us who are taking part in the UN Tax Convention, which is going to end up with binding legal instruments, it's been very interesting to see the kind of blockers and the kind of supporters, and to sort of anticipate the kind of fights that we'll also have during the UN tax convention process. I know one of our biggest fears right now, and I know I'm just a tax person, is particularly the debt section. We were hoping for an intergovernmental process similar to what we've seen with the UN tax convention. I know this will be covered in the next webinar that's going to happen under this series. So even as the tax people, we're really in solidarity with our colleagues within the debt work, because there is definitely a very toxic tax debt cycle that is taking place within a lot of our countries. A lot of these fiscal consolidation measures are really as a result of terrible debt management and a global financial architecture that simply doesn't work. So we're also in solidarity with them. Right now, I know that they've said that there'll be a vote that might be taking place at 3 p.m. New York time today on the latest draft. And essentially, the preparatory committee is going to adapt that new draft. So we're probably going to get like a newer version of the outcome document before we get to the actual conference. So I know for a lot of us, we're feeling a little disheartened by how much the ambition has been lessened, but I think it's really time to call for change, because ultimately, as African countries, I think we shouldn't leave the table without anything. You can't reduce aid, you refuse to reform debt, you refuse to give us taxing rights. Something has to give eventually. We can't keep operating in this system. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you in Sevilla as you join us in this fight of ensuring that we at least come out with something from this 2-year process on the Financing for Development conference. Thanks, Faith.
Thank you, Everlyn, for giving us some snippets here and there around what the discussion around the tax issue. So I'll open it up now for any questions, any comments, any additions. I know that there are a lot of us here who have also been closely following both the tax and trade issue. So if you have any additional insights that you might have, could be personal, could be from an analysis that your organization has done, we would like to invite you to share those now. And if you have any questions, because part of why we have convened this space is to also be able to understand and unpack some of the issues. So if you have any specific questions, anything you'd like to be clarified specifically around the tax and trade issue within the context of the FFT process, kindly go ahead and do so. And I think in the meantime, as we wait for people to come to raise their hands and ask questions, Everlyn and Jen, I would like you to think about some of those key demands, those key issues that you think should be at the top of our priority as those of us who are going to be closely engaging in the conference. What are some of those issues that we should highlight, whether it's in the elevators or it's during some of the breaks, perhaps lunch or whatever the case may be? What should be some of those issues that we should be highlighting? All right, so if there's any questions, any additions, kindly raise your hand. Okay, so someone called Akina Mama has raised their hand. I'm not sure who it is. I think it might be Patricia. Is that you?
Yes, Faith. It's Mercy. There's a couple of questions that we received when we put out the invitation for the space itself, but most of them were centered around the silence procedure. So people wanted to know what that was, because I think for those who are following the process over the weekend, you must have seen some emails going around about the silence procedure and then it being broken, and the document being taken out of public scrutiny. So maybe Everlyn or Jane could share more about that, so that people could sort of understand if there was also an impact of the document being placed under silence procedure, as we wait for 3 p.m. for whether the document will be the final document and then also its adoption. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, for raising that particular question. Anyone else would like to raise a question or share comments, share thoughts? I think I just wanted to share particularly around the issue of policy space that Jen highlighted, and just circling back to the ongoing conversation right now within the context of the AU, where we are talking about reparative justice and acknowledging that it goes beyond us being able to be financially compensated, but also us being able to secure the policy space that we need, whether it's in terms of trade or tax or debt, and the broader economic system, for us to be able to secure that policy space to determine the kind of development trajectory that we want. And I think that drawing from some of the insights that have been shared around this particular question of reparative justice would essentially feed very well into this conversation around policy space. And when we talk about the issue of special and differential treatment, I think it's an aspect that is needed, not just in the trade area, not just in the tax area, but even within the climate space, for example. And I know climate is an issue that we'll be discussing later on Thursday. But even within the health sector, even when we talk about technology and technology transfer, I think that we need to really re-emphasize the concept of special and differential treatment, because it's a policy tool that is necessary for us to be able to develop. Yeah, so I see Joanna. Joanna, your hand is up. Would you like to?
Yes, sorry, I'm not in a very good environment. Good afternoon again, colleagues, and I just want to say thank you to the two presenters. That was very insightful, and I think some of us have been part of these spaces before. Unfortunately for me, I will not be going, but I think we have a massive delegates that will be going. I'm Joanna from Christian Aid. I work on economic justice. And of course, we have partners, civil society partners that are coming from many of the African region that we're working with, Sierra Leone, Zimbabwe, that will be part of those processes. And as Jane highlighted, I think, and also Everlyn, for us, it's been a concern, and also it's also a question of hope. It's a question of hope, looking at the politics, the geopolitics that is playing, like Everlyn mentioned, around the US backing off, and not just the US backing off. You see that it's a game. And so I have two questions, but also a comment around how prepared, and that will go for Jane. How prepared are the civil society mechanism of FFT4 in terms of bringing the voices together from all the continents, ensure that we are well represented? And I know sometimes we might say that civil society will influence, but we don't like force for things to happen. So what's the hope based on what we have been hearing, what's been going on? We have you see countries backing off, cutting on aid. So and Faith, you talk on the policy space and the secrecy that exists in those policy space, in the fact that even what's being discussed in the open, maybe what is discussed behind the scene is different. So that's one. And also post the FFD4, looking at, I know the AFCOD is coming. It's also another platform in Ghana to look at the post FFD4, in terms of the outcome and what's to be coming up. So that's a future thing. But I think what we also need to look at is the language. So how prepared also, there have been a lot of concern around the Addis FFD4 and how the games were played in terms of the languages they use, the co-opting of even civil society languages, feminist languages to balance and to play the game well. I don't know what strategies are in place to really critically look at some of these wordings and maybe saying that the how rather than the what. So I just want to know about that. And also a space for civil society convergence. As I mentioned right now, I'm working with our civil society partners. I want to see how I can link them in some of these spaces. I know some of the spaces that are already in there, for example, what Femnet is trying to do, but it will be good to know if there is, people who are going to FFD4, what are the spaces that will be there for feminist convergence, and how do we share the information with our colleagues, civil society, that will be going. But just want to say well done. And I think for me, it's a courage and we just need to continue. But also beyond the FFD4, how can we engage, our local governments, our national government to really be able to brace up, given that all what is happening, but also what has been their own practice, in the region around issues of transparency, the closure of spaces. So for me, it's also a concern. Whilst we are talking to the global architecture, but how do we also balance the messages? I know we want to be cautious of the spaces that we take those things into account, but I think it's also something for me we really need to think about, as we are progressing. I just want to say thank you, and I don't want to come to the space without adding my voice. But thank you so much, Faith, for the opportunity. And Akina, thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you so much for those comments, as well as the question that you have posed. I think for most of us, but a lot of what Jane and Everlyn have shared is food for thought. So, we need to get back to a process of reflection and thinking about how do we better position ourselves, because part of why it's important for us to dig deep into the technicalities is that it gives us insights into re-strategizing. Sometimes we talk about re-strategizing without even specifically having clarity on why it is that we need to re-strategize. So yeah, thanks. Anyone else? I'll pose just one more additional question, and then I'll invite Everlyn and Jen to respond to some of the comments that have been raised. And I know that one of the things that the both of you has emphasized is the fact that the current document is a watered down document, and that there's really very low ambition when it comes to a lot of what entails within that document. And you've also provided that evidence while you have indicated that there's a silver lining in certain aspects, but we know that a lot of what you have shared is really gloom and mostly gloom and doom. So I wanted to ask, what do you think a weak outcome document would mean for us as African people and people in the global South? What are some of the most concerning issues? But also, in terms of implication, what would it mean? Because part of what our expectation was that this FFD process would contribute very significantly towards the reform of the global economic architecture. So if the document as it is not necessarily leading us to that particular state, then what are the implications? And and then later on, the other question that I had posed on what are some of the key issues we should be aware of. So whichever of you would like to go first, please take the stage.
I'll allow Miss Jane Nalunga to go first so that I can just say I support what she said.
Evelyn, that's unfair. You should go first and also talk about the negotiations, what's really going on. Because this last PrepCom in New York, I could see you sweating and moving up and down. So you go first and tell us about that.
Tell us
Because
why
I
you are
was
sweating
there.
as well.
And also talk about that silent procedure, which wasn't very silent. We talk about that.
Wow, Jane, you've put me on the spot. The tables have turned. So I'll try and talk about the silent procedure. Though in my personal experience, I haven't really seen it happen in person as often as someone as seasoned as Jane. But the silent procedure is essentially one of those methods of trying to achieve consensus. So you have a draft document, and it's exactly how the saying goes, silence gives consent. If you don't break your silence on a particular section, then that is taken as you accepting and consenting to that section. So at a certain point, the co-facilitators, which is another very odd thing, and the co-facilitators are Mexico, Nepal, Zambia, and I've forgotten the last country, Zambia, and oh yes, Norway, our bridge builders. Yes, so at a certain point, the co-facilitators, after all the negotiations that were happening during the intersessionals, tried to essentially come up with a draft that is addressing everyone's concerns. And then they put it through the silent procedure. I think it was just over this weekend. And a couple of countries did break their silence on certain aspects and further diluted certain sections. And so now, after that, they came up with some changes again, and now they're going to present that document to now the actual co-chairs of the preparatory committee, and it's going to be voted upon. It's going to be adopted, which is also very strange because we all thought that that level of adoption, the final, like adopting the final document, is going to happen at the actual conference. So there's also some concerns with how this has happened and how the procedure has happened. And I know Joanna asked, what are we doing? But particularly, I think the civil society financing for development mechanism has really tried. This is a big document with a lot of interest and a lot of coordination, and also regional interests and, topical interests. And I think they've really, really tried to follow the process, to follow the negotiations, even during the intersessionals, where we aren't even allowed to speak. And we've reached this stage. We've called them out on diluting the ambition. We've called them out on the lack of transparency, and we'll continue calling them out because that is our job as civil society, really. It's to hold everyone to account, including the negotiators. But honestly, I think we also do require quite a lot of solidarity from our civil society colleagues in the global north, where primarily all of these blockers are. So for instance, I remember Canada was in full support of the section on gender responsive budgeting. They are so welcoming of gender language within the document. But then when it gets to the substantive issues that are actually beneficial for women, and particularly women in developing countries, they are blockers. They are one of the biggest blockers. So they also sometimes weaponize it against us, you know. They try and use our language to appease to us while diluting the document in the sections that really matter. So to answer your question, Faith, I think our elevator pitch really should be, we have to come out of this process with something. And I think particularly for me, that is the debt reform. I think for tax, at the very least, we can live to see another day through the UN Tax Convention process. So we'll still continue fighting through that. We're gearing up for the August negotiations. But for some of these processes, if the UN process is not successful, like the FFD process, we're going to end up going to the second committee, which is what also happened for the tax convention process, where essentially we ask a member state to table a resolution to begin an intergovernmental process on debt as well. So that is something that can happen, though we're hoping it can happen through the financing for development mechanism. And sadly, I know that there are also ideas to also seek some way of getting something through the G20, especially during the South African presidency, which I think has been so far very difficult and might not be successful. So, but we'll keep fighting the fight. I mean, even for the tax process, it took almost 10 years for us to get to where we are right now. So again, I'm encouraging you not to get disheartened. And also to answer Joanna's question about what are we doing nationally. So unfortunately, we have to keep fighting these fights at different levels, at the international level, but also at domestic level in terms of making these changes. I think under also the civil society financing for development mechanism, we also have the Afrika financing for development mechanism and we're also going to have a side session, actually. Let me pitch that during the session during the conference, where we're also going to be talking about looking ahead past the FFD4 conference. What do we want for our continent, and what are the options that we have to pursue the goals that we had at the beginning of this process? So Jane, I'm gonna hand over to you now.
Okay. Thank you
I
very
hope I've
much.
covered it all.
Thank you so much. And Everlyn, thank you so much for that fight. The last, that PrepCom, the first PrepCom in New York wasn't very, very easy, you know, and also because we put our heart there, you know, your entire heart, your soul. You know, you could see disappointments, you could see people saying, wow, even in this country, can you believe it? You know, maybe this process has also shown us who our friends are and who our not enemies, not so friends are. You know, because there was a lot of really disappointment when it came to certain countries, which you hope will support us as developing countries, and you know, and they didn't support us. But I would also like to point out the work done by the FFD mechanism, because for me, that mechanism, the civil society FFD mechanism has filled a very huge gap. And I think if it wasn't there, wouldn't know what to do really. But it helps us to coordinate our inputs and also keep updated, but also to get to know the dynamics of the negotiations. And that's really, really important, you know, knowing what are the dynamics of the negotiations. I also not so used to the UN system, and the FFD mechanism was super, you know, spot on this is what needs to be done, we need to do that. That was super. And the way the FFD mechanism was organized in groupings, international trade, debt, tax, it helped us to synthesize the outcomes in real time. You get that document, the trade people look at it, you come up with a statement, so we have been able to do that real-time input because of that mechanism. And for me, I think we need to borrow a leaf from that mechanism, that we can be able, in even other forums, maybe the COP negotiations, the WTO, we need that coordinating mechanism, so we can learn from that. So for me, with FFD, civil society FFD mechanism, I can say whatever outcomes are, we have fought a good fight. And we have given negotiators a run for their money. We have done that. Those who are supporting us, we have been able to give them information, and those who are not supporting us, so it has been a good fight, really, and thanks to the FFD mechanism. You were saying, face what would happen, when we have a weak outcome. And you answered your question, that this is the FFD really is about the reform of the global economic governance. And we are where we are as Africa's developing countries because of those inequities within that system, So if we don't get a good outcome, and Everlyn has said it very well, it's not a binding, UN things are not binding really, but they set the norm, the agenda, and you can be able to gauge what other forums will say. And already we know, for us in the WTO negotiations, that is the fight is on, because of what's coming out of the UN. So for me, the outcomes are not going to be, if they are so weak, the system, because we need to reform, as urgent as yesterday, we need to reform the global financial and trade architecture, so that we can address issues of poverty, issues of marginalization. We can't be a continent which is so rich, yet the people are so poor. So we need to address that. The one thing which we need to fight for, is really difficult to say this is the one thing. First, you have raised the issue of policy space, which is okay. We need policy space. Policy space cuts across, taxing rights, the WTO reform, the issue of the special safeguard mechanisms, the issues around investment policy, ISDS. All those are issues around policy space. But I think when we are deciding what to fight for, we need to look at that one issue which we can't fight for it in any other fora. Take an example of the trade issues. We can go back and fight in the WTO. We can go back and fight in the bilateral, the free trade agreements. The EPAs will have fought very hard, So there are those spaces where we can be able to fight for some of these issues which haven't been addressed. So for that one thing, we need to debate, and I tend to agree with Everlyn that that debt mechanism, can we get it elsewhere, or do we need to fight for it in the UN? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. The question regarding beyond Sevilla, what are the opportunities? I think we need to learn. I said before, we need to learn a lot of lessons. What's happening when you look at the negotiations. One thing I have also learned is that there are expectations which we have, as the global community, that maybe we are in this all of us together. The climate change, and
Yes,
you expect that there wouldn't be a lot of fighting,
Now,
but
I
then
think
you
Stuart
see.
had taken Mom somewhere in Tinder. I think maybe we'll need.
Hello?
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Sorry.
So we need to learn lessons. We need also to learn who is on our side, who isn't, on this issue. What can we do better in the negotiations? Everlyn has talked about, linking up to our colleagues in the global north, our comrades, which is very critical. There is also the issue of working at national level and at AU level. I think in any subsequent negotiations, we need to mobilize nationally, regionally, like as ESC, so that we have a position as ESC and we hold our leaders, our negotiators accountable. We need to work more with our Africa Union, so we need to learn lessons. We need also to coordinate our efforts better. Because at the end of the day, when we talk about trade, and even you talk about tax, we talk about debt, what's that common goal we are fighting for, because we are moving from critical minerals, trade, what's that common issue? And we need to debate that. What's that common issue? Because when we talk about a UN tax convention, it isn't an end in itself. So what's the end we are looking at? When we talk about debt, it isn't that, so we need to agree to that, and it will help in subsequent negotiations. Moving forward, Sevilla is not an end, There are other forums, other sites for fighting, for battles to protect our rights. For WTO, we have the MC, is it 13 or 14? We have the ministerial in Cameroon. Is it 13, I think?
13.
It's 13 in Cameroon. That's really a site for real negotiations. We have lots of free trade agreements, in the region. Kenya is already negotiating with the EU. All those things, we need to be there and to give each other support, because you see, when EU or US is negotiating with Kenya, and we sit back, and Kenya is weak, it becomes a template. Next time, that's the template which is brought to Tanzania, it's taken to Kenya, it's taken to Ghana, So we need to be cognizant of that, that if there's somebody negotiating with Kenya, we are there, and we are supporting the Kenya. At national and respective regional level, there are processes going on. We need to review our policies. By the way, we talk about policy space, but sometimes even in the space which we have, we don't use it very well, So we need to utilize the little space we have, review, for example, our investment codes to make them strong. By the time we go to Sevilla, we already have strong investment policies or trade policies. I think I will stop. There. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much to the both of you. I think this has been quite insightful. I know that everyone here can agree with me that they are leaving to go and try and research a bit more on a specific area that they have been inspired to look further into. But I think the key message that's coming out, which is quite interesting, considering that we have been discussing tax and trade, is that one of the key takeaways that we want, that we should be fighting for, is the UN Framework Convention on Sovereign Debt. And I think for me, that message is very clear because we have alternatives, like Jen said, we have alternatives when it comes to trade, we have alternatives when it comes to tax. But in this case, we really, really need to use the FFD space, the FFD process to get this particular win. So in whichever way you'd like to contribute to the fight, whether it's through a social media action or it's through an article or it's through educating some of your comrades who will be going to that space that were not here, I think it's clear that that is the one thing that we'd like to push for. So thank you so much, Everlyn, and thank you so much, Jen, for highlighting that. And I think at this point, I would like to bring the conversation to a close and to invite us to look out for some of the side events that will be held at the FFD4 conference. I know Everlyn already shared about one of the spaces. Kindly look out for some of those side spaces because they are important spaces for strategy, but also for providing clarity around some of the demands. I would also like to remind us that on Thursday, we will meet again at 3 p.m. East Africa time for another conversation around debt, but also ecological and climate finance. So make that time and let us learn more around this particular process. Thank you so much and have yourselves a good day. Because I don't want to go into that good morning, because we're in different time zones. So thank you so much.
Faith. Thank you,
so much,
thank you,
Everlyn, for making that
everyone.
time. We're always grateful.
Thank you so much,
Bye-bye.
Faith, and everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Faith, for being a great moderator.
Thank you, Everlyn, for sharing you so much wisdom. Someone texted me and said, "Who is that?" Oh my God, she has so much wisdom.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks.